On 5 News tonight, Theresa May makes her mark with a ruthless reshuffle. Criticism, though, over Boris Johnson's new job and a mum's anger over the death of Poppy Worthington. It's all change in the cabinet as the new Prime Minister sacks some of the biggest names from the Cameron era. Boris Johnson, though, is Foreign Secretary, but has not gone down well with some of his counterparts around the world.
The French Foreign Minister, in fact, has sent me a charming letter just a couple of hours ago, saying how much he looked forward to working together.
And police apologise after prosecutors say there's not enough evidence to charge Poppy Worthington's father over her death. Also tonight, we're talking about Prince Harry getting tested for HIV to help tackle the stigma.
Being the person that I am and the people that I end up being around, I'm still sitting and I'm still nervous.
Following in the footsteps of his mother, Harry says he wants to raise awareness of the condition. And Pokemon Go finally hits the UK. We'll discuss the pros and cons for our kids. Good evening, welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Matt Barbette. She's been Prime Minister just over 24 hours, but Theresa May has wasted no time clearing out the old cabinet and building up her own. After last night's shock appointment of Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, today she sacked Michael Gove, the man who kiboshed Boris's bid to be leader. Fellow challenger Andrea Leadsom, though, was given a promotion. And today the man who's become the new Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has told us that after the era of austerity, it is time for a new approach. Let's speak to our political editor, Andy Bell, in Westminster. Andy, the drama just keeps on coming.
Yes, Matt, I think it is worth reminding ourselves that we haven't had an election. The same side is still in power, and yet we've had this wholesale clear out of personnel and a whole new look as Theresa May, the new Prime Minister, has set out today to create her own government. Don't let the smile fool you. Our new Prime Minister has just been sacking ministers who served her predecessor. This is what the new team looks like. Liz Truss promoted to Justice Secretary. Justine Greening to Education. Andrea Leadsom, who pulled out of the leadership race on Monday, became Environment Secretary. Amber Rudd was appointed Home Secretary last night. We've been told this cabinet would be more female, but in fact, the split is about the same as before. But some have held on, like Patrick McLaughlin, formerly Transport, now Party Chairman.
She's really sweeping away a lot of the old faces, apart from yourself.
Well, no, she's bringing some back as well, so she's doing her best to make sure she's got a balanced government.
But it's about the most sweeping cabinet change we've had in years.
Well, I haven't seen it all yet, so I'll take your word for it a bit later on.
And Jeremy Hunt went in without an NHS badge in his lapel and came out with one. He stays as Health Secretary.
But I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled. Thank you, Andy. Best job in government.
David Davis will have the newly created job of Secretary of State for exiting the EU. And let's not forget the biggest surprise so far, Boris Johnson, appointed yesterday as Foreign Secretary. And here are the ministers who've gone, with some well-known faces like Michael Gove and George Osborne. They have been on social media, Michael Gove saying it had been an enormous privilege to serve and wishing the new team good luck, as did George Osborne, who wished his successor and the new Prime Minister well. Today, the new Chancellor, Philip Hammond, met the US Treasury Secretary. In fact, it was the second time in 2 days the American had come to number 11. Well, there was a different Chancellor yesterday. When I spoke to Philip Hammond, I asked him if the new government meant the end of austerity.
We have a short-term imperative to do whatever is necessary to support the economy and to restore consumer and business confidence. The new circumstances mean that we will need to map out a new pathway to bringing the country's public finances into balance.
That does sound like a change of direction in Downing Street. Flowers have been arriving there for the new Prime Minister today. It's been a day of congratulations for her, condolences for others.
Andy, it's fair to say it was a fairly unforgiving reshuffle, wasn't it?
Yes, and I think Theresa May was clearly wanting to make it clear that this was her new government. This wasn't some kind of retread, just a sort of minor reshuffle from the days when David Cameron was in charge. So she's signalling a change of direction with the personnel. As you heard from Philip Hammond there, I think there's a signal in terms of economic policy as well, that it's now official that they're not going to try and eliminate the budget deficit by the time of 2020. And also when it comes to Brexit, the appointments there are quite interesting. You've got some very well-established Eurosceptics, people who campaign for the Leave side, who've been given the job of basically setting about negotiating Britain's exit from the EU. It looks to me as if Theresa May is saying to them, OK, this is what you wanted, this is what you said would produce a better outcome for Britain, go out and get it for me.
Theresa May obviously been hitting the ground running as well. She's been talking to some pretty important people abroad.
Yes, yesterday we know she spoke to Chancellor Merkel of Germany and President Hollande of France. She's had a phone call today, a congratulatory phone call from President Obama in the USA, and we're told that during that phone call they talked about strengthening and protecting the special relationship. That's exactly the sort of thing that a UK Prime Minister always wants to hear from a US President. She's also talked to Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission. That was probably a bit more of a testy conversation, because there she was making it clear she needs a bit more time. She wants more time in terms of the negotiations over leaving the EU. And one last point to make, her first visit outside London as Prime Minister is going to be to Scotland tomorrow.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. Well, Boris Johnson said that leaving the European Union is a chance to give Britain a greater global profile in his first speech as Foreign Secretary. But it sounds like he'll have a job getting some of his international counterparts on side. France's Foreign Minister today called him a liar with his back against the wall, while others could hardly conceal their shock, their anger or amusement. We'll discuss that in a moment, but first, Simon Vigar has more.
He's usually got so much to say. Not this morning.
What about those who've insulted Mr Johnson? Good morning.
The new Foreign Secretary usually gets on his bike, but now he has a government car, although finding it proved problematic. Eventually, he located the black BMW over the road. A poker face from Mr Johnson, which is more than the spokesman for the US State Department managed when he was told of the appointment.
Boris Johnson. How do you think?
And this is Labour leadership challenger Angela Eagle, silenced in mid-flow.
They've just made him Foreign Secretary.
The thing is, it's hard to get these images out of your head. The sinking in a river, rugby tackling people during what was supposed to be a football match, rugby charging children during a visit to Japan. It doesn't scream diplomacy. And then there's the zip wire. Who can forget the zip wire?
Get me a ladder.
Well, Sweden's former Prime Minister doesn't. Carl Bildt tweeted, "I wish it was a joke, but I fear it isn't." The former Belgian PM said, clearly British humour has no borders. And the current French Foreign Minister branded Boris Johnson a liar with his back against the wall. The Foreign Secretary says he received a different message from Paris.
After a vote like the referendum result on June the 23rd, it is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting. The French Foreign Minister, in fact, has sent me a charming letter this just a couple of hours ago, saying how much he looked forward to working together.
It's not a great start, because a Boris soundbite is meant to be remembered.
Most recently, he said President Obama, it was down to his part Kenyan heritage that he backed the UK staying in the EU. Before that, he said Hillary Clinton, quite possibly the next president of the US, he compared her to a sadistic nurse in a mental hospital. So pretty punchy stuff. I think he might have to make some apologies.
But those who've worked with Mr Johnson say he's a great appointment. But you know, a lot of people are saying it's a joke, a bad joke. What's your response to that?
Well, I suspect they are exactly the same people who were predicting that he would be a catastrophic Mayor of London. And they were proven spectacularly wrong, because he was a very effective and successful Mayor of London. I have no doubt he'll be both effective and impressive as Foreign Secretary.
As always with Boris Johnson, it will not take long to find out.
Very good, very exciting. Thank you.
Simon Vigar, 5 News.
I'm joined now by Eleanor Mills, editorial director of the Sunday Times, and Griff Whitty, London bureau chief at the Washington Post. And Griff, I hate to tell you, he was born in New York, so he's half yours as well.
Yes, well, he won't be running for president, obviously. He has a job here in the UK. It's an interesting choice. It's one that I don't think has gone down terribly well in Washington. I think that there was a real sense initially about Boris that he was cartoonish, he was a bit of a clown, but rather harmless. But I think that perception changed in Washington in the last few months with the referendum campaign, with some of his comments about Obama being part Kenyan. And I think that there was a sense there that he was willing to do anything to become prime minister, and a mistrust that's grown about him.
Although that description is something that could be levelled at another blonde, mop-haired individual that's known over the other side of the pond.
Yes, certainly. We don't have a leg to stand on in terms of being high and mighty about this. But I think that the fact that Boris Johnson will be Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, he will be the nation's top diplomat, is something, it's a job, obviously, that demands extraordinary discipline. And when you think discipline, you do not think of Boris Johnson.
Something that Hillary Clinton herself has done, of course, being America's top diplomat as Secretary of State. But, Eleanor, he's got a lot of bridges to build now.
Well, I think he has, but I think to go back to what you were saying about Hillary Clinton being Secretary of State, I think there's something rather similar going on here. If we rewind a bit, Theresa May has become leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. Boris was the front runner for that. So in a way, by putting him in her team in such a high-profile position, it makes her look very magnanimous. It also gives her a very high-profile Brexiteer as part of the package, which she certainly needed. And also, what Obama did with Hillary Clinton rather cleverly was he did the same trick. He looked very magnanimous. There she was. She had been his rival, and he packed her off. So basically, she was on a plane the entire time and not really messing around with what he wanted to do at home. So it's quite a clever trick because actually, I mean, there's all this guff about how he's going to be our most senior diplomat, which is kind of true in a titular fashion. But the reality is that David Davis is going to be doing the negotiations on Brexit. He's the Minister for Brexit. And Liam Fox is going to be the chap who's given the really serious bit of diplomacy, which is negotiating new deals with China, trade deals, NAFTA, all that kind of stuff. Boris is going to be kept very well out of that. And the only thing that he might get involved in, which would be rather, I think, dangerous, would be the Middle East. He didn't cover himself in glory in Palestine. And in that situation, I'm sure Theresa May would actually take those steps herself.
Yeah, he did beat a rather hasty retreat, didn't he, from that part of the world. Here's the thing, Griff, though. I mean, couldn't Americans in particular and the rest of the world more generally warm to the guy because he does display some typically British traits, whether you agree with his politics or not. He's got a great sense of humour. You can't argue with that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that prior to the referendum campaign, he was someone who was regarded rather well in the United States, particularly after the Olympics. He was seen as someone who was a great champion for Britain, someone who was out there really advertising the best quality. Well, I think that's going to be that will be his challenge, to prove that he can be a serious politician, serious diplomat. You mentioned that he's not going to be involved in Europe, he's not going to be involved in these trade deals, but I think there's a great anxiety in the United States right now that Britain is not going to be involved in these very serious issues confronting the globe. The Middle East, Russia. Can he take a role in those that's serious and that's important?
Eleanor, final word to you, and what this says about Theresa May's leadership. I know you think it's a clever move, but and a lot of people are shocked by Boris, but you think it's a smart one.
I think you underestimate Boris at your peril. I've worked with him, actually, as his editor. I think he's an extremely clever man.
Why do we not see more of that sometimes?
Well, I think you will see more of it. And actually, what a lot of diplomacy is about is sitting in a room and trying to get your opposite number to come round to your point of view. And I know few people who, one-on-one or in a small group, are more charming than Boris.
I'm afraid my point of view is we're out of time. So thank you both very much indeed for coming in. Well, one big announcement that wasn't made today, despite expectations, was a cut in interest rates. The Bank of England, though, suggested it could happen next month instead. Some analysts had expected the main rate to be lowered to 0.25% in the wake of Britain's decision to leave the EU. Mark Carney hinted so himself. But the committee that makes the decisions say they expect to make that move next month instead. Experts say they're waiting to see how the economy fares.
The reason interest rates weren't cut today by Mark Carney at the Bank of England and his Monetary Policy Committee is simply that they don't have any evidence yet. They think there might be economic damage to the UK from the Brexit vote, but they're not sure. So with that in mind, they've decided to wait until a later date.
Still to come on 5 News tonight. The police failings which mean no charges over the death of Poppy Worthington. Why Prince Harry had a test online for HIV. And Pokemon Go is here, but the phenomenon is already sparking safety warnings from the police. Find out why after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. The mother of a 13-month-old girl who died from serious injuries at her home says she is angry and disappointed that the girl's father will not face charges. Earlier this year, a judge ruled that Poppy Worthington probably was sexually abused by her father, Paul, before she died. He has always denied wrongdoing, and today prosecutors said there is not enough evidence to take him to court. Frankie McCamley reports.
Poppy Worthington was just 13 months old when she died suddenly. She was found with serious injuries at her home in Barrow, but no one has ever been prosecuted. After another review of the case in January, a judge ruled that she had been sexually assaulted by her father, Paul Worthington, who's in hiding and has always denied any wrongdoing. The ruling led to a review by the Crown Prosecution Service, who today announced there's still insufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of a conviction. The response from Cumbria Police, whose investigation was fraught with failings, nothing short of humiliating.
The primary responsibility of the police when investigating infant and child deaths is to shed light on the circumstances surrounding the death, and in so doing provide a voice for the child. In our failure to undertake an effective investigation after her death, Cumbria Constabulary has let down Poppy Worthington and her family, and I deeply regret this.
The force accepted they made numerous mistakes, failing to preserve evidence. Poppy's last nappy, clothing and bedding was lost. Her father's laptop was also misplaced, and no real investigation into the toddler's death was carried out by police until 9 months later. A lawyer for Poppy's mother said, "This is obviously a very distressing time. She is desperate to understand more about the police investigations and the events leading up to Poppy's death. She is angry and disappointed with the decision by the Crown Prosecution Service." But the family of Mr Worthington said he has been dealt an injustice because the evidence which could have cleared him has also been misplaced. Another inquest later this year will be the last chance to find out why Poppy is here and not growing up as the happy girl her family wants to remember. Frankie McCamley, 5 News.
Ambulance services across England have missed their target for attending life-threatening emergencies for an entire year. They're supposed to have an ambulance on the scene within 8 minutes, at least 75% of the time, but that has now been missed 12 months in a row. His mum famously took on the cause of people with HIV and AIDS, and now Prince Harry has carried on Diana's legacy by having an HIV test live online. As his result came back negative just moments later, the Prince said the speed and simplicity of it all should encourage anyone to get themselves checked out. Charlotte Grant has more.
Hopefully everything's going to be absolutely fine.
As a soldier, he may have fought in Afghanistan, but as a patient about to be tested for HIV, Prince Harry admitted he was having last-minute jitters.
How am I feeling?
Yeah.
Nervous.
Today, the Prince decided to show how quick and easy it is to have a finger prick test for HIV to raise awareness of the virus.
Weirdly, that didn't even hurt.
There you go.
And it was a very public statement. The procedure broadcast live on the internet.
So whether you're a man, woman, gay, straight, black, white, whatever, even ginger, why wouldn't you come and have a test?
Well, this is the thing, and I think
What Harry did today was very reminiscent of his mum Diana's campaign work in the 80s. Visiting an HIV/AIDS hospital ward, she hoped the images of her shaking hands with patients and taking the time to talk to them would help reduce the stigma around HIV. Now, 2 decades later, Harry wants to do the same. But infection rates in the UK are on the rise, and it's thought nearly 1 in 5 people who are HIV positive don't know they have the virus. That's why Prince Harry wants more people to be tested. And as for his results...
Straight away, as I can tell you here, you have an HIV non-reactive result here.
Harry's test was negative, but he hopes the fact he's taken it will have a positive effect on others coming forward. Charlotte Grant, 5 News.
With me now is Ian Green, Chief Executive of HIV charity, the Terence Higgins Trust. And Ian, it's a big deal, isn't it?
It's a groundbreaking moment in the fight against HIV. The fact that Prince Harry was prepared to take a HIV test live and to get the result immediately really does do a huge amount to destigmatise the virus and to encourage people to take HIV tests.
Because there was a huge stigma around it when his mother took up the cause. Does that still exist all these years later?
I mean, it's changed, but there is still a huge amount of stigma around HIV. So people living with the virus do face a huge amount of discrimination, and it's Prince Harry's decision today and the focus he's given to HIV will do a huge amount, as his mother did, to reduce the stigma surrounding the virus.
That's the interesting thing you said there, living with the virus. Again, back then, that wasn't the case. People thought it could be a death sentence. Of course, that doesn't happen now. Medicines are a lot cheaper, less side effects. But even so, people still need to be tested because there's a significant proportion who don't know they're HIV positive.
Absolutely. It's estimated that 1 in 6 people living with HIV don't know they're HIV positive. It's really important for their health that they get tested and they understand if they're HIV positive, but also for the health of others, because if somebody's on treatment, it's virtually impossible for them to transmit the virus.
We've seen how easy it is with him doing it. Just is it the same for people? They can do it at home even?
We've just sent out 4,500 home test kits, so people can do it in the privacy of their own home. And if they have a reactive test result, they can phone us up and we'll provide them with support.
Just finally, we heard Harry there saying, of course, it's indiscriminate. It can affect anybody. But in particular, with his focus on Africa, South Africa, and his Centre Bali charity, there is still an issue there around HIV and AIDS.
There certainly is. And in the UK, the 2 groups that are disproportionately affected are gay men and those from sub-Saharan Africa. And so that we need to make sure that we target the messages around testing and treatment to those specific groups. But anyone who's worried should take a HIV test.
Ian, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Now it is official. The Welsh football team is better than England's, at least according to the new FIFA rankings. After reaching the semi-final of Euro 2016, Wales have now climbed to 11th in the world. England, who got knocked out much earlier, are 2 places below in 13th. There were incredible scenes at the Tour de France this afternoon as British rider Chris Froome had to run partway up a mountain after falling off his bike. The Team Sky rider was leading the overall race, but as the crowd got too close, there were a series of accidents and Froome came off. As he waited for his team car to catch up and give him another bike, other riders overtook him. Eventually, he finished the stage on Mont Ventoux on 2 wheels. And though it caused him to slip back to 6th place, officials have decided he should be given the same finishing time as those who won the stage, so he will keep wearing the yellow jersey, for now at least. If you haven't heard of it yet, then Pokemon Go will soon be pretty inescapable. It's a smartphone game that involves people searching in real life for creatures that appear on their phone. If that sounds a little bit confusing, it's already enthralled both children and grown-ups across America. And Nintendo's shares have gone up more than 50% since its release. Today, it was unleashed on the UK, and as Dominic Reynolds reports, the warnings about it came almost immediately as well.
You're not imagining it. There are even more people on phones wandering around in their own world than normal. Something's just arrived which gives them a whole new world to wander in.
Brace yourselves for Pokemon Go. It's a computer game, but you play it in the real world. An app on your phone turns your actual surroundings into a sort of cartoon version of them, and you then have to wander around and search for Pokemon, little cartoon creatures. I'm off.
And those Pokemon now have an awful lot of people after them. The game's already broken records in the US for a mobile game. Can you see him? With its mixture of real and virtual worlds.
Guys, excuse me. Are you playing Pokemon?
Even on day one, catching fans didn't take long.
And why do people like it so much?
It's, in a way, it's bringing a few people together. Like down there, we saw 2 people. They were catching a Pokemon, and other group of people came and said, "Oh, you're catching this Pokemon. We want to catch it too."
So it's like a sociable computer game.
And it's a social, unsocial thing. Yeah, I guess.
How old are you guys? Yeah, 24. I'm 24. You say that like you're a bit embarrassed.
Yeah, I think there is no limits, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there are also gamers who are maybe 16, but also 30 years.
Pokemon, that's short for Pocket Monsters, by the way, started as a Game Boy game 20 years ago. You might have seen the cartoon. That then spawned a craze for toys and trading cards by 2000. And now they're back. And this expert reckons that history is the game's secret weapon.
People my age and younger have always had Pokemon in their lives, which means we've always wanted to actually feel like we're in the game, and this is pretty darn close.
Have you been hit by traffic yet?
I have come very close to being hit by a bus, but in my defense, the Pokemon was very high level, and it would have been really great to get.
Totally understandable. Worth a head injury.
Right.
But there are genuine concerns around safety. Some players have reported receiving minor injuries, and the NSPCC has said it's worried the game could be exploited by would-be abusers. Police in London have today issued official safety advice for players. The general gist of it: don't end up in a road or in a river because you're trying to catch them all. Dominic Reynolds, 5 News.
Yeah, that seems so obvious. But joining me now to talk more about the safety concerns that Dom mentioned there is Emily Cherry from the NSPCC. And Emily, the charity urged the app's makers to delay its release in the UK because of safety worries. Tell us more.
So we did, absolutely. We wrote to the makers, to Nintendo, yesterday and actually asked them to delay the app, but also offered to work with them. You know, this app is clearly an app aimed at children. It's clearly an enjoyable app. The best kind of apps would have the right child safety features in them, and we were offering to work with them so that they could embed those so that children could play this safely.
Because if people didn't quite get it from Dom's piece there, it's a bit like geocaching. It's going around and searching out things. Now, you wouldn't let a young child go and do that on their own, but just because it's on a phone, this feels like it could be acceptable.
Yeah, and I think a teenager that I was with earlier was actually talking about being an interactive treasure hunt kind of around. It's a really clever app, and it actually, we know from Childline just how important the online world and the offline world is for children. They don't make too much of a distinction between the two. So building these two things together is really clever. But just in the same way that something like swimming is dangerous, parents teach their children to swim. So we need to really make sure that children who are playing, either in the offline world or the online world, are being really taught safely.
And we've heard stories of people, you can go in the game, you can set up places to lure in other Pokemon players, and we've seen stories in the States of people doing that in out-of-the-way places and then mugging people for their phones. Let's talk, though, about the upsides of the game. It gets people out there, it gets them active.
And I think one of the things that I really like about it is just seeing how you can enjoy and really explore the places the way you live, kind of near to you. As long as you do that safely, with your parents, with the knowledge, with friends, so you're not there out on your own, this could be a really exciting opportunity for children to see places they've never seen in the locality.
Yeah, plenty of my colleagues have been having a go today, and they found several places around our newsroom, actually, they had no idea existed. You know, churches around here they wouldn't otherwise look at. So that kind of thing, leading people to history, is a good thing.
It is a really good thing, but there is also the dangerous side of it. We have seen there is some Pokemons placed outside a sex shop in Plymouth.
Right.
Not an area particularly
No.
that you will want young children to be able to.
And we haven't even mentioned it, we haven't got time, unfortunately, but all the screen time that we're trying to limit our kids from having as well. Emily, thanks so much for coming in. Right, that's just about it from us for now. Sian Welby has the weather next, and Danny is here with updates throughout the evening here on Channel 5. For now, thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow. Goodbye.